Have you ever been told to schedule your farm work around someone's brunch plans? I have, by a woman who moved next door, called herself an agricultural influencer, and parked her Porsche in front of my barn to stop my harvest. That's right, she blocked a working farmer's only route to his field because tractors ruin ambiance. If you've ever dealt with a neighbor who turned entitlement into an art form, drop your state in the comments. This one's universal. I didn't react the way she expected. I followed every law, documented everything, and when the storm rolled in, so did justice. Some folks think farmers are passive. We're not. We're just patient. But push us far enough and we'll plow through more than just fields. What happened next made her scream louder than her car alarm. And you better believe every second was caught on camera. The sound of metal crunching under my harvester's wheels was both horrifying and oddly satisfying. Did I just drive my 18-ton combine over a $100,000 Porsche? You bet I did. And honestly, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Comment below where you're watching from because you'll want to stick around for how this entitled neighbor got exactly what she deserved after a month of pure hell. Some folks might call it extreme, but when your entire livelihood is at stake and someone deliberately blocks your only way to save it, well, let's just say desperate times call for desperate measures. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began, right here in Blackstone Hollow, where my family has farmed the same 120 acres for 3 generations. My name is Grant Thompson. I'm 42 years old, a widower with a teenage son, and a 3rd-generation farmer. It's honest land, worked by 3 generations since my grandfather bought it after WIR. The centerpiece of our operation is the original barn, built in 1932 with hand-hewn beams that have weathered nearly a century of seasons. That barn isn't just a building. It's the heart of our farm, housing most of our equipment and serving as our main storage facility during harvest season. Everything was going along just fine until about 6 months ago, when the old Pearson place next door sold. It had been vacant for a couple of years after old Jim Pearson passed away, his kids all having moved to the city with no interest in keeping the family property. The real estate listing called it a gentleman's farm. 40 acres with a farmhouse that had been modernized somewhere in the 1980s. Nothing special, but decent enough. I figured whoever bought it would probably be another retiree looking for some peace and quiet, maybe keep a few chickens or grow a vegetable garden. Boy, was I wrong. The new owner turned out to be Stephanie Keller, a 30-something transplant from New York with her city-perfect suede heels caked in mud, each angry step flinging clumps of dirt. I smiled and nodded, because that's what we do around here. Be polite. Welcome, newcomers. Live and let live. If I'd known what was coming, I might have been less welcoming. The first signs of trouble started almost immediately. Construction crews began showing up at the crack of dawn, 6 a.m. on the dot, 7 days a week. The quaint farmhouse was being transformed into what looked like something from a luxury home magazine, with an infinity pool, outdoor kitchen, and what she called a wellness pavilion. Weekend parties brought convoys of expensive cars down our narrow country road, often blocking access to my fields when they'd park along the shoulder. Still, I kept my mouth shut. It wasn't my business how she used her property, as long as it didn't interfere with mine. And honestly, I was busy enough with my own concerns. Running a farm solo while raising a 17-year-old son doesn't leave much time for neighborly disputes. Tyler, my son, was less patient with the situation. "Dad, that lady's turning this place into some kind of rich people's playground," he'd complained after her 3rd weekend party had woken him up with thumping bass that carried across the fields until 3 in the morning. "Can't you say something to her?" I had promised I would, but kept putting it off. Confrontation isn't my style. I prefer to keep my head down and mind my own business. That approach has served me well for most of my life. It didn't serve me this time, though. Not with Stephanie Keller. My wife, Sarah, would have known how to handle this situation. She had a gift for talking to people, finding common ground even with the most difficult personalities. In the 5 years since cancer took her, I've tried to channel her diplomacy, especially for Tyler's sake. But there are days when her absence hits harder than others, and dealing with someone like Stephanie made me acutely aware of the void Sarah had left. There were nights I'd sit at our kitchen table after Tyler went to bed, staring at her photo, wondering what advice she'd give. "Stand your ground without losing your grace," she might have said. That was Sarah. Firm, but always kind. I tried to honor that balance, even as Stephanie pushed every button I had. The property had been in perfect harmony with the Pearsons. Jim and his wife Elaine understood the rhythms of country living, the unspoken rules of rural communities. We shared equipment, helped each other during harvests, and respected the invisible lines that had existed between our families for decades before any official survey. There was an understanding, a neighborly contract stronger than any legal document. When Stephanie arrived with her city expectations and disregard for local customs, it wasn't just annoying. It felt like a desecration of something sacred, this delicate ecosystem of rural relationships built on respect and reciprocity. I should have known something was seriously wrong when she asked if I could possibly schedule harvests for weekdays only, because the machinery noise was ruining her weekend brunches. But that request? That was nothing compared to what she'd do next. It was early May when the first real conflict erupted. Spring planting season on a vegetable farm means early mornings. 5 a.m. start times are standard if you want to get the work done before the heat of the day sets in. I'd been out on my tractor since before sunrise, preparing beds for tomato seedlings, when I noticed a county sheriff's vehicle coming up my drive. Deputy Johnson had known me my entire life. He'd gone to high school with my older brother. So I was surprised when he approached with an official-looking clipboard and an uncomfortable expression. "Grant," he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, "I've got a noise complaint here, from your neighbor. Says you're violating the county noise ordinance." I shut off the tractor and just stared at him. "Pete, I'm farming. This is what farming sounds like." He had the decency to look embarrassed. "I know that, and you know that, but Miss Keller apparently doesn't. She's citing the ordinance about noise before 7 a.m. in residential areas." I pointed out that we weren't in a residential area. This was agricultural land zoned differently specifically to allow for farming operations. Pete nodded. "I know. I already told her that. But she insisted I come out and make an official report. Said she'd take it up with the county commissioners if I didn't." He shrugged apologetically. "Just doing my job, Grant." I understood. He was caught in the middle, same as me. I signed his form and got back to work, figuring that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Not by a long shot. Over the next few weeks, Stephanie escalated her campaign. First came calls to the county about potential zoning violations on my property. Then complaints about the smell of manure fertilizer drifting over to her property. Each time, officials would come out, inspect, and find nothing wrong. But each visit took time away from my work and added to my stress. The turning point came when I discovered a new fence being erected along what Stephanie claimed was our property line, except it was a good 6 feet onto what had always been Thompson land. When I confronted the workers, they shrugged and said they were just following the plans their boss had given them. I immediately removed the portion that was on my property, which led to my first direct confrontation with Stephanie herself. She came storming across the field in designer boots that were clearly never intended for actual farmland, her perfectly highlighted hair bouncing with each angry step. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, gesturing at the dismantled fence sections. "That's my property you're tampering with." I tried to stay calm, explaining that the fence had been placed on my land, not hers. Her response was to laugh, actually laugh, in my face. "Oh, Grant, I've had the property professionally surveyed. The boundaries aren't where you think they are. I have the paperwork to prove it." There was something in her smile that day that sent a chill through me. It wasn't just entitlement, it was calculation. I later learned from Richard Williams, my elderly neighbor on the other side, that Stephanie had a history of these kinds of disputes. He heard from my cousin in Connecticut that she pulled the same stunt in her fancy neighborhood there, Richard told me over coffee at the local diner. Got herself elected to the Homeowners Association board and then started fining people for all sorts of ridiculous violations. Forced 3 families to sell to her friends at below market value. The final straw in this early phase came when Stephanie's landscaping crew severed one of my main irrigation lines while installing an elaborate water feature near our property boundary. The damage wasn't discovered until the next day, when I turned on the system and found one entire field section bone dry. By the time I tracked down the problem and repaired it, nearly an acre of young seedlings had been damaged beyond saving, a loss of several $1,000s in potential crop value. When I confronted Stephanie about it, her response was breathtaking in its dismissiveness. "It's just water and dirt, Grant. Don't be so dramatic. Maybe it's time you upgraded that antiquated watering system anyway." She actually suggested I should thank her for the opportunity to modernize. What made the irrigation incident particularly galling was the timing. Those seedlings weren't just any crop. They were a special heirloom tomato variety my father had developed decades ago. The Thompson Ruby, we called it. Local chefs paid premium prices for them, and they'd become something of a signature for our farm. Losing nearly a full acre of them wasn't just a financial blow. It felt personal, like losing a piece of my father's legacy. As I surveyed the wilted plants, I remembered how Dad would spend evenings carefully selecting the best specimens for seed saving, telling me stories about how his father had taught him the importance of preserving agricultural diversity. "Big companies want everyone growing the same thing, son," he'd say, "but there's magic in difference. Never forget that." Now, because of Stephanie's carelessness, a season's worth of that carefully preserved genetic heritage was gone. Tried reasoning with her one more time, showed her the damaged plants, explained their significance beyond just dollars and cents. For a moment, just a flicker, I thought I saw something like comprehension in her eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by that practiced corporate smile. "I'm sure you can just buy more seeds, Grant. Or better yet, upgrade to something more commercial. I read an article about how these heritage varieties are actually less efficient." That's when I knew words alone wouldn't be enough. That night, I installed security cameras pointing at our shared property line and filed a police report about the damaged irrigation system. The report didn't accomplish much. It was treated as an accidental property damage issue, but at least I had an official record started. The police report was filed, but Stephanie just laughed it off. "It's just water and dirt, Grant. Don't be so dramatic." But 2 days later, when I checked my cameras, I saw her walking along our property line at midnight with the surveyor. That's when I realized this wasn't just entitlement, this was war. The certified letter arrived 3 weeks after I caught Stephanie and her surveyor on camera. It was from a prestigious law firm in the nearest city, formally informing me that a professional survey had determined that the historic property line between our farms was significantly misrepresented in county records. According to their findings, the actual boundary was approximately 12 feet further onto what I had always known as Thompson land. This included the main access path to my barn, a critical route that my farm equipment needed to reach the fields on the north side of my property. The letter concluded with a generous offer to allow me continued access for a reasonable fee, provided I signed an acknowledgement of the corrected boundary. My stomach dropped as I read it. I couldn't afford a legal battle with someone like Stephanie. Most farmers operate on thin margins, and while we weren't underwater, a protracted legal fight could easily bankrupt us. Still, I had no choice but to hire an attorney of my own. Frank Wilson was a semi-retired lawyer who specialized in agricultural land issues. His office was above the hardware store in town, and his fees were reasonable, but still more than I could comfortably afford. "This is pretty aggressive," Frank said, reviewing the survey and letter, "but not entirely unexpected. Property lines in rural areas like ours weren't always marked with modern precision. There can be legitimate disputes." He promised to look into the historical records and see what he could find, but warned me that these cases could be complicated and time-consuming. Word of the dispute spread quickly through our small community. Farming communities are tight-knit by necessity. We rely on each other in ways city folks might not understand. By the end of the week, I'd had visits from 5 neighboring farmers, all offering support and sharing their own stories of conflicts with city people moving into rural areas.